This will be a tutorial about how to scaffold a modern WordPress project, which includes deploying to a staging server and also potentially to a production server on a separate branch, which is a very common theme that you want to have in your projects. And actually this tutorial is going to be a bit more general because sometimes you have a legacy project which you would like to modernize and to which you would like to add the ability for the code to be automatically deployed to the server every time you make a commit to a branch that has a specific name. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I will be setting up that workflow on this boilerplate repository, which is a WordPress theme, which currently does not have any GitHub actions set up, so nothing happens after you push a commit. And what we will be doing is we will make it so that whenever you push something to the main branch, it will be automatically deployed to this siler.testcopy.ch server upstream, which is actually running this theme. Okay, so how do you go about this? Well, step number one is that if you have a legacy project, first you need to add some things to it. And in my opinion, the easiest way to go about that is to treat it as a, the best way to go about it is to start from scratch with a modern project and then just add all of your stuff into the modern project. So there is this tool called Generator Leverage WordPress, which scaffolds a modern WordPress project, including all of the scripts that are necessary to package your files into a zip and prepare them to be deployed upstream. I will leave the link to this generator in the video description, and the README contains instructions for how to use it. So I have boilerplate cloned locally over here, and this is where I have a bunch of projects. So here I'm going to scaffold a new project. So just like the README says, I'm going to run, I believe I have all of this installed already, so I'm just going to run this command, yo leverage WordPress. And then you should get prompted for a bunch of things. For example, where do you want to scaffold your project? I want to scaffold it in Siler Modern, because I'll just use that as a boilerplate. Now, project name. This is quite relevant because it will be used for PHP namespaces. So in this case, I'll just call it Siler. And now, since I am doing this with a project that already exists, I have to be careful whether a PHP namespace already exists. So I'm going to go to the boilerplate repository and maybe check if there is a composer.json. There is no composer.json. So there is no auto loading, there are no namespaces, it's just an old style project. So I don't really need to worry too much about what I call the project, except that it would be nice perhaps to keep it the same name as it is here. And here it is called Siler. So I'm just going to keep that name. Next, it asks you for a project type. In this case, we are doing a theme. And now the main name of the local server, this is only really relevant for testing, but usually you're using a tool like localwp, and the tool will tell you what is the domain name. So let's see if I have Siler cloned anywhere here. I do. So for me, that is silerkz.local. So I'm going to say silerkz.local. Okay, and I'm going to wait for that. Now it's copying the files, scaffolding everything, and installing dependencies. And that is that. Okay. It also initializes an empty directory. So now we have this Siler Modern. And so now what I'm going to do is I am going to basically copy most of these files into the old repository. So I'm going to go into the old repository, and now it's time to do some copying. So I'm going to copy this JS folder. I don't need to copy the SAS folder because it's already there. I'm going to copy the source folder. I'm going to copy the tests folder, the types folder, vendor not needed, editor config is already there, but I'm actually going to overwrite this just in case this one is better. Git ignore. This one doesn't have a git ignore, so that's all right. We can keep that. Composer.json, yes, I want it. Functions.php. Now we have to be careful about functions.php because here we have one type of functions.php, and here we have an entirely different kind of functions.php that actually sets up a modern project. So we have to merge these two things. So for that, I'm just going to copy this code here and just paste it there. That's gonna auto load. Okay, there we go. Now another thing I have to do, since this is an old project, now I just modernized an old project. So ideally now in this Sylarkese project, we will no longer be writing code within these like blocks and functions and library and so on. That would be considered legacy functionality, and we would write new functionality inside of this source folder. But by default, this source folder just contains some boilerplate code that doesn't actually do anything except for this assets.php file, which actually runs this tool called WP Utilitatem, which registers WordPress assets and does a lot of other magic. If you want to know more about that, look into the documentation for WP Utilitatem and everything that it does. But this is just going to add overhead, and currently we are not using this. So I'm just going to remove these functions for now. They can be added later. Actually, maybe it's better if I just comment them out so that it's easier to add them later. There we go. All right. And now this code basically does nothing because this is the entry point which calls assets init, and assets init does nothing. So this is just ready to be used, but it doesn't do anything at all. All right, let's keep going. We copied composer, we copied functions. Now package.json, we have two package.json files. Now in terms of scripts, we're just gonna take these scripts and completely replace these scripts with the new ones that we have here. Because these scripts have these zip prod, dist, and so on, which is later used during the build process in order to be able to deploy the theme. It also has some Husky stuff so that things get formatted when you commit. Okay, next thing is PHP-CS. I'm going to overwrite that if we don't have it, and we don't. PHP unit, yes, we want that as well. Style.css, no. tsconfig, yes. Even though we are not using TypeScript, but maybe we will. Not in this project, but doesn't hurt to have it there. And this project already has Webpack, so we just have to make sure that it is compatible. So in this case, the code is set in library.js checkout.js. So let me just see library.js checkout.js. Okay, so it has some dependencies, but it doesn't import any other files. So it is safe for me to move this file into the JS directory because that's where it is expected to be. Wait, is it safe for me? So I have to be careful because, like, how is this checkout enqueued? Checkout. Yes, so it's enqueued here. So now I have to change where it is going to be output. And in that case, this is going to be okay, well, we have to be careful about. Okay, so here Webpack outputs to library.js build, but this is not what we want because the modern version, the modern version expects it to be in build/js. So we're gonna change the output path over here, and this thing we are going to move into JS. So I'm gonna go to library.js, and then I can delete the sample script. Yes, that's just for demonstration purposes. I can copy this over here, and then in Webpack config, I can just modify this to be JS checkout.js. And now I just have to be careful to enqueue it properly, because now the output is going to be in build JS, well, yeah, build JS checkout.bundle.js. Now in terms of CSS, the modern scripts expect the CSS to be elsewhere, and in this case the CSS is in library CSS. So another thing we have to do is change how Sass works, which is going to actually break a lot of things. So I think what we should do, yeah, wait. So here we have some SCSS. Okay. And here that is enqueued somewhere entirely differently. So in order for the WP Utilitatem library to work, it expects the CSS to be output into the build/CSS directory. And that is not where it is output in this case, but this also contains some libraries that are not our code whatsoever. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a replace, and I'm going to do replace/library/CSS with /build/CSS, but now I have to be careful what I replace and what I do not replace. So this one I do not want to replace, so no. This is some lightbox script, so I also do not want to replace that. This is our script, so I can replace it if it is in the Sass CSS folder. So anything that is in the SCSS folder I can replace, and that is only cart, checkout, and single product. So none of these I can replace. None of this I can replace. So I can only replace cart, checkout. So this is the checkout one, and it's actually a library. So it's I replace /library/CSS/build with build/CSS. And then I say yes, yes, and I also do it here. There we go. That should be good. Okay, so that should be enqueuing all of the things. All right, so that's the webpack and package.json. And I believe that should be it. So now I'm going to just make one, so to speak, dirty commit, just so that we don't lose our work. Modernizing codebase. Okay. And now it's time to actually add the GitHub action that is going to deploy this code upstream. So another thing about package.json that we have to be careful about, if we go to the modern repository, we have to make sure that we add all of the necessary dev dependencies. So here I go to package.json, and then dev dependencies, it seems like I can just replace all of these with these, and I can leave dependencies as they are. In terms of files, this files array defines all of the files that are going to be deployed to the upstream server. In this case, this repository already has files defined that need to be uploaded to the upstream server, but anything you add here is going to be uploaded to the upstream server. Anything you do not add here is not going to be uploaded to the upstream server. So for example, the node modules folder, which is going to be created after we run npm install, will not be uploaded to the upstream server. Okay. And that means that if you add like a new directory or a file or something that is not covered by these globs, that means you have to include it over here so that it gets uploaded to the server. Okay, so now that we have done all of that, I think we can run npm install just to make sure it works. That will take some time, so we'll just wait for that to finish. And while that is going on, we can add a GitHub action. So for that, we create a .github folder, and then we're going to call this staging.yaml, because this will be a file that deploys to the staging server. If you also want to deploy to a production server, you can have two files, one called staging, one called production, and you would just replace things within those files accordingly. So there is this GitHub gist, which I will also link to, that you can just copy paste, and you can use it as the boilerplate to set up the GitHub action. You just have to replace everything so that it works properly. Now the first and the most difficult thing is the SSH private key. So whichever server you are deploying onto, you need to have SSH access to that server, and GitHub needs to have the private key, and the server that you are deploying to needs to have the associated public key. Now, how do you do this? Well, in SSH deploy, you can see they give you a command that you have to use in order to generate a key. So I'm going to run this command. Whoops, that's Python. And I'm going to generate a key. In this case, I'm going to save it into .ssh, temp, throwaway key. I don't want to passphrase. Okay. And this is the same thing you would do. You would just name the key differently. And then two files will be created. This one without an extension is the private key, and this one with an extension is the public key. Now, first what you do is you take this private key, which is a throwaway key, so I'm going to show it to you in this case, but usually you do not want anyone to know this key, very important. But this is what a private key looks like, and I can just copy it. And then what I do is I go into the repository, and here there are settings. And under settings, there is security, and then there is secrets and variables, and then there is secrets and variables for GitHub Actions. And then what you do is you go here and click on Add New Repository Secret, and you add an SSH private key secret, which I have already done with a different key that we are actually using, which I am not going to show you. So what you would do is you would just take this key that you created over here, and you would paste it into over here and just call it SSH private key. But I have already done that. And once you have done that, the next thing you would do is you would get the public key, So this is the public key. This is safe for anyone to know. And this key you need to add to the server that you will be deploying to. In this case, we would be deploying to the staging server for Siler. So that is this server. So I SSH into it. So you have to have SSH access already. See, I'm connected. And then there is this .ssh folder which contains authorized keys. And what I would do is I would say echo and then this key. Copy the space, that's bad. I'm in a new line. So I would echo this into .ssh authorized keys. In this case, I'm not going to do this because then anyone watching this tutorial would be able to access this server. But you need to do this so that GitHub Actions are able to access the server. I have done that for the other key, which is actually saved in the repository, for which I did not show you the private key. And once all of that is done, then this variable is set properly, and that's the most difficult one. The rest of the stuff is pretty easy. Remote host is siler.testcopy.ch. Did I get that right? Yes, it is. Remote user in our case is testcop, and remote port is 2121. Don't touch args, don't touch source. Remote path you need to configure accordingly. In our case, that is siler.testcopy.ch, wp content, teams, Siler, I believe. I'm not sure. Wait, let me check. So cd, Siler, wp content, themes. So it's actually Siler Keze. Siler Kaiser. Okay. So this is good. Okay, and now you have filled in all of the data here. And that should be it. And now I can run a commit, which now failed. No valid configuration found. Why? No valid configuration. Oh, right. What I forgot to do is from the modern repository, there's this configuration for linting staged files. So I have to paste this somewhere within package.json. And now this should work. There we go. And I can do this. Okay, and now I don't want these to be too dirty commits, so I'm gonna do a reword of this and fix up of this, and I'm gonna say add GitHub Actions and modernize codebase. And I'm gonna push to main. Okay, I realized I made an oopsie. You don't actually place it in .github and then staging.yaml. It has to be .github workflows staging.yaml. And then I write this over here and then gonna do an oopsie and push. And now if I refresh, that should run GitHub action. Okay, it took it a second to recognize it, but now it is running the action. And if I click here, I can check the status, and it will let me know in case I messed anything up. And it looks like I did. There is an error. Cannot stat siler.zip. I see. So this happens because the name of the zip file is expected to be siler.zip, but the name of the zip file depends on the name you have over here. So I'm just going to change this to siler because that doesn't really matter. And I'm going to override this commit and force push so that I don't make too many dirty commits. And now let's see if it works. Okay, so that took a second, but the job completed successfully now. And if I go to the Siler website, I should just go and check that nothing is broken now. Oh no, so this site is not running PHP 8, which is bad. The modern setup expects the site to run PHP 8. So now, if your site is not running PHP 8, you cannot do this code modernization. In our case, we can run PHP 8. So I'm going to quickly update the server to PHP 8 and then check again whether everything is fine. However, this is private, so I cannot show this on video. So I'm gonna stop the recording for a second. Okay, I updated the site to PHP 8.1 and now everything seems to be working just fine. And that concludes the setup of a modern WordPress theme, including GitHub Actions.